India is in the crosshairs of Donald Trump's latest trade war. The US has slapped a 27% tariff on Indian goods as part of a sweeping shakeup of global trade rules. This new policy ditches a system in place for over 75 years and imposes a 10% baseline tariff on all imports, even steeper penalties for certain nations. To understand all of this better, let's first break down what tariffs are all about. Tariffs are essentially taxes imposed on goods that are brought into a country from other nations. Think of them as an entry fee that foreign products must pay before being sold in the local market. Governments use tariffs to regulate trade, influence prices, and sometimes to protect domestic industries. One of the primary reasons government impose tariffs is to safeguard local businesses. When imported goods are too cheap, domestic companies may struggle to compete. By making foreign products more expensive through tariffs, governments encourage consumers to buy locally produced goods. Additionally, tariffs serve as a source of revenue for government, similar to other types of taxes. In some cases, they are also used as a tool for negotiating trade deals or controlling the flow of specific goods. There are different types of tariffs, each serving a particular purpose. An import tariff is a tax on goods entering the country, making foreign products pricier for consumers. An export tariff, though less common, is applied to goods leaving the country, often to ensure that essential resources remain within nation and inside the borders. Tariffs can also be classified based on how they are calculated. A specific tariff charges a fixed amount per unit of a product regardless of its value, such as ₹100 per smartphone. Meanwhile, an ad valorem tariff is a percentage-based tax, meaning the higher the price of the product, the higher the tariff applied to it. For everyday consumers, tariffs have a direct impact on prices. When tariffs are high, imported goods such as foreign smartphones, cars, and clothing become more expensive. This can push consumers toward purchasing locally made alternatives, which in turn boosts domestic manufacturing and businesses. However, tariffs can also lead to trade disputes between countries. If one country imposes tariffs, the affected country might respond with its own tariffs on exports, leading to a trade war, a situation where both countries keep increasing trade restrictions, ultimately making goods more expensive worldwide. Understanding tariffs helps us see why certain products cost more, why governments push for initiatives like Make in India, and how international trade works basically. Coming back to Trump's new tariff strategy, Trump's new tariff structure targets multiple countries with varying levels of duties. India faces a 27% tariff, while China's tariff stands at 34%, rising to 54% with earlier duties. Vietnam is hit with 46%, Taiwan with 32%, and the European Union with 20%. Others affected include Japan at 24%, South Korea at 25%, and Thailand at 37%. However, Russia has managed to escape the list despite holding a $2.5 billion trade surplus with the US. Trump's tariff strategy is driven by a broader agenda of economic nationalism and trade protectionism. His administration argues that these tariffs are necessary to reduce America's trade deficits, bring manufacturing jobs back to the US, and counteract what he sees as unfair trade practices by countries like China. The move also plays into his election campaign rhetoric, appealing domestic industries and voters who feel globalization has harmed American workers. However, critics argue that these tariffs disrupt global supply chains, increase costs for American consumers and businesses, and could provoke retaliatory measures from affected nations, leading to further economic instability. Economists warn that higher tariffs could result in inflation, weakening consumer purchasing power. JP Morgan estimates that the new tariffs could raise around $400 billion in revenue, about 1.3% of GDP, making it the largest tax increase since 1968. Meanwhile, price hikes on consumer goods could increase inflation by 1 to 1.5% in 2025. The announcement triggered a sharp sell-off in the global markets. The Philadelphia Semiconductor Index (ETF) fell 4.6%, dragged down by Nvidia, Broadcom, and Micron Technology, while companies with strong exposure to China, such as Caterpillar and Boeing, each dropped over 4%. The S&P 500 ETF recorded its biggest loss since 2022, with around 90% of stocks trading lower in early hours. Analysts at Citigroup, led by Atif Malik, warned that Apple's gross profits could decline by up to 9% if it were to absorb cost hikes resulting from the tariffs. Talking about India, the US is the top destination for India's exports, accounting for 18% of the total cargo shipped. India's exports of electric products and mobile phones have grown rapidly to about $6 billion, especially after Apple began assembling iPhones in India. However, these exports may face a setback due to the tariffs. While some components for iPhones are sourced locally, many are imported from China, South Korea, and Taiwan, all countries that have been slapped with high tariffs. This could affect local component suppliers as well. However, the higher tariffs imposed on Vietnam and Thailand create an opportunity for India to emerge as a preferred electronics manufacturing hub. The gems and jewellery sector, which accounts for about 30% of US jewellery imports, is also expected to be hit. Once India's top export category to the US, this sector has now been overtaken by mobile phones and electronic products. Analysts had warned that this industry would suffer even before the 27% tariff was announced. Leading jewelry exporters like Rajesh Exports, Titan, and Kalyan Jewelers may struggle with declining US sales. For now, pharmaceuticals have been exempted from the reciprocal tariffs. India is a major exporter of generic drugs to the US, with key companies including Sun Pharma, Cipla, and Dr. Reddy's. However, trade experts warn that a sectoral tariff on pharmaceuticals could be imposed in the future, impacting India's pharma industry significantly. The textiles and apparel industry, which has traditionally faced stiff competition from Bangladesh and Vietnam, now has the opportunity to expand its US market share. As these countries have been hit with high reciprocal tariffs, Indian manufacturers like Gokuldas Exports and Arvind could benefit from a shift in the demand. The steel, aluminium, and auto part industries will be directly affected by a 25% tariff. However, some auto component manufacturers like Samvardhana Motherson and Sona BLW, which have production facilities in Mexico, can mitigate the impact thanks to the free trade arrangement between Mexico and the US. America's closest trade partners, Canada and Mexico, have been exempted for now. However, Trump's 25% fentanyl-related duties remain in place, along with the 10% tariff on Canadian energy and potash. USMCA-compliant goods continue to enjoy exemptions, offering relief to the US automakers. India's Ministry of Commerce and Industry has responded, stating that they are carefully examining the implications of these tariffs. They are actively engaging with the Indian exporters and industry leaders to assess the potential impact on trade and business. Despite the tariff hike, India-US trade discussions remain ongoing. The Mission 500 initiative announced by Modi and Trump in February aimed to increase bilateral trade to $500 billion by 2030. However, the introduction of these tariffs presents a significant challenge in achieving that goal. Meanwhile, US-based multinational companies like Apple, Nike, and Walmart, which rely heavily on global supply chains, particularly in China and Vietnam, are expected to lead market declines, erasing nearly $1.7 trillion from the S&P 500 index. In fact, on the day of announcement, Apple stock fell 7.7%, leading declines among the magnificent 7 tech giants. Tesla, Microsoft, Nvidia, Alphabet, Amazon, and Meta also followed the downtrend. Analysts believe this stems from fears that tariffs could significantly increase operational costs and reduce profits, especially for companies with overseas manufacturing. According to JP Morgan economist Michael Ferroli, this tariff regime is equivalent to the largest tax increase since 1968, potentially adding 1 to 1.5% to commodity prices and pressuring consumer spending, which could bring the US economy dangerously close to recession. Trump's new tariffs are being seen as a negotiation tactic, a way to pressure other countries into trade talks and possibly open up new markets for the US allies. But while this might work in the short term, bringing manufacturing back to the US is not as simple as raising tariffs. The reality is that American companies moved their supply chains overseas decades ago for good reasons, like lower costs, access to skilled labor, and around-the-clock production efficiency. Trying to reverse that trend overnight is like trying to turn back time. It's just not realistic. The biggest impact on these tariffs will be on everyday Americans. Prices of imported goods could jump by 25 to 45%, making everything from groceries to gadgets significantly more expensive. But here's the catch. Wages aren't going up at the same rate. That means consumers will feel the squeeze, cutting back on spending, which could slow down the economy. Large companies like Apple, Walmart, and Tesla, which rely on global supply chains, will also take a hit. If other countries retaliate with their own tariffs, American exports like iPhones and electric cars could see a drop in demand, making things even worse. At the same time, these tariffs are reshaping global supply chains, and some countries might actually benefit. India, for example, is in a strong position because its tariff rates are lower than those imposed on China, Vietnam, and Thailand. This could make India a more attractive destination for electronics manufacturing, but to fully capitalize on this opportunity, India needs to move faster, improving infrastructure, making business easier, and integrating more deeply into global trade networks. One industry that will immediately feel the pinch is smartphones and electronics. Most of these devices are made in Asia, so the tariffs won't suddenly make US manufacturing viable, they'll just push the prices. Brands like Apple, Samsung, and Motorola will have no choice but to pass these costs on to consumers. While many Americans buy phones through monthly payment plans, those payments will get more expensive, affecting affordability for many. In the long run, fixing US manufacturing is not just about tariffs. It requires investing in skilled workers, building infrastructure, and creating a strong supply chain for components, all of which take years, not months. Meanwhile, uncertainty around these tariffs, potential trade wars, and economic slowdowns could create even bigger problems for businesses and consumers alike. At the end of the day, Trump's tariffs are a risky bet. While they might work as a bargaining chip, they also come with a huge price tag, higher inflation, less consumer spending, and potential global trade chaos. Some countries like India could gain from the shift, but for most, the road ahead looks challenging and uncertain. Now, the questions are: will the government negotiate a trade relief package? Will Indian businesses find alternative markets to counter the impact of these tariffs? The Department of Commerce has stated that they are exploring potential opportunities arising from these trade shifts. However, one thing is certain: Indian exporters will need to rethink their strategies moving forward. What do you think? Are these tariffs justified? How should India respond? Let us know in the comments, and for more such stories, keep following BWTV.